In 1975, the American car market was standing at a fascinating crossroads. The oil crisis of 1973 had changed everything, not just the way people drove, but the way they thought about cars altogether. The era of big V8 engines and endless horsepower was losing ground to something leaner, smarter, and, most importantly, more fuel-efficient. It was a time when small cars from across the ocean began flooding the United States, offering an entirely different kind of motoring experience. That year, just over 2 million imported cars were sold in America. Precisely 2,074,653 vehicles built outside the country. Although this figure represented a dip from the more than 2.5 million imports seen just a few years prior, it was still a massive leap compared to the mere 500,000 sold in 1965. The tide had turned, and foreign automakers were reshaping the American automotive landscape. The United States International Trade Commission, USIC, which kept meticulous records of such movements, compiled data that told an interesting story. Published in 1981 as Automotive Trade Statistics 1964 to 1980, the report wasn't meant to thrill enthusiasts or historians. It was designed for economists, not dreamers. Yet, tucked between dry tables and import tallies was a snapshot of how global car culture had taken root in America. From Japanese compacts to European luxury sedans, the 1975 market was a colorful blend of engineering philosophies and national identities. Walk through any dealership lot in 1975, and you would have seen a mix of nameplates that reflected this changing world. Toyota, Honda, and Datsun, which would later become Nissan, were establishing themselves as household names, praised for their dependability and fuel economy. The humble Toyota Corolla had already become a symbol of practical motoring, while the Datsun 510 and 280Z appealed to those who wanted something a bit more exciting without sacrificing reliability. Honda's Civic was making waves too, with its lightweight build and impressive gas mileage. A car perfectly timed for a country suddenly obsessed with fuel efficiency. Meanwhile, over in Europe, Volkswagen still reigned supreme. The Beetle was nearing the end of its original production run, yet it remained one of America's favorite imports thanks to its simplicity and affordability. The newer Golf, sold in the US as the Rabbit, was preparing to take over as the modern face of VW, bringing sharper lines and more practicality. Then there were the British and Italian entrants, stylish, charismatic, and occasionally temperamental. MG, Triumph, and Fiat continued to charm enthusiasts who valued character over convenience, while Volvo and Saab provided a Scandinavian counterpoint with their focus on safety and engineering integrity. The 1970s also saw Mercedes-Benz and BMW pushing hard into the premium segment, slowly rewriting America's perception of what a luxury car could be. The Mercedes 240D, with its slow but immortal diesel engine, offered an entirely different kind of prestige, one built on durability and understated refinement rather than sheer size. BMW's 2002 was already a cult classic by 1975, its combination of agility and everyday usability turning it into a favorite among driving purists. Even Porsche found steady footing during these years, offering sports cars that somehow survived the economic turbulence while capturing the imagination of those unwilling to compromise on passion. Looking back, 1975 wasn't just another year of sales figures and trade statistics. It marked the point when America fully opened its roads to the rest of the world's automotive ideas. Imports were no longer curiosities from foreign lands. They were becoming part of the American story. From the small streets of San Francisco to the highways of the Midwest, people were beginning to appreciate the precision of Japanese design, the flair of European craftsmanship, and the practicality that many domestic automakers were only just learning to emulate. The USIC report may not have cared about the emotional connection between drivers and their cars, but those 2 million imports certainly did. Each one represented a shift in taste, a step away from the gas-guzzling mentality of the past, and a move toward a more global understanding of mobility. The 22 most popular imported models that year weren't just successful products. They were ambassadors of change, rolling symbols of a world that was getting smaller and more interconnected with every mile driven. In hindsight, the 1975 import scene reads like a prologue to the automotive landscape we know today. The seeds planted then, efficiency, quality, and innovation, would eventually grow into the defining attributes of the modern car market. Half a century later, It's clear that 1975 wasn't merely a statistical blip in an economist's ledger. It was the year the rest of the world truly arrived on America's driveways. By the time the mid-1970s rolled around, American car buyers were learning new names and new ways of thinking about what a car should be. Gasoline shortages and long lines at fuel stations had left their mark on the public's consciousness. The days of 8-cylinder excess were giving way to something more rational, and the parking lots of suburban America began to look a little more international with each passing year. What had once been seen as foreign was now fashionable, not in a pretentious sense, but in a practical one. The imported car had become a smart choice. Every model on that 1975 import list carried a story. For example, the Volkswagen Beetle, long past its original design date, still sold in massive numbers simply because it did everything people needed it to do. It started in the morning, sipped gas all day, and rarely complained. For many Americans, it was their first encounter with German engineering, an introduction that would later lead some toward the Golf, Jetta, or even an Audi or BMW. Then there was Toyota, whose Corolla had cemented itself as the dependable commuter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was built to last. And in a time of uncertainty, that mattered. Toyota's reputation was quietly taking root, car by car, driveway by driveway. Datsun's 510 had earned its place as the poor man's BMW, agile and honest, while its 280Z carried the spirit of the sports car into a new era of efficiency. Both of these Japanese brands were redefining what Americans could expect from small cars, proof that practicality and pleasure didn't have to be opposites. Meanwhile, the Europeans offered something entirely different. The Fiat 124 Spider brought Italian style to the suburbs, and though its electrical quirks were the stuff of legend, its design and driving character made it irresistible. MG and Triumph still had their loyalists, romantics who didn't mind spending weekends with a wrench in one hand and a service manual in the other. Volvo's 240 series was establishing itself as the thinking person's car. Safe, solid, and unpretentious, a rolling statement of Scandinavian sensibility. Saab, with its aircraft-inspired design and turbocharging experiments, appealed to drivers who wanted something truly different. And then there were the luxury imports, cars that carried a different kind of appeal. Mercedes-Benz was already the gold standard of durability and quiet sophistication. Its diesel sedans, though slow, were built to outlast nearly anything on the road. BMW, still finding its voice in the US, used models like the 2002 and the newer 3 Series to establish the idea of the sports sedan, a car that could deliver excitement without sacrificing practicality. Porsche, too, continued to capture the hearts of enthusiasts who saw driving as more than mere transportation. In a sense, 1975 was the moment when the American car buyer became a citizen of the automotive world. The domestic giants, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, were still powerful, but they were being challenged in ways they hadn't expected. Foreign automakers weren't just offering cheaper cars. They were offering better ideas. Fuel economy, compact dimensions, mechanical simplicity, and reliability were no longer niche interests. They were becoming the new normal. Dealerships across the country reflected this change. Where once only muscle cars and massive sedans had ruled the showroom floor, now there were rows of small, efficient vehicles with badges that read Toyota, Datsun, or Volkswagen. Buyers who had once equated size with success were beginning to see beauty in restraint. The automotive press took notice too, publishing glowing reviews of these nimble imports that handled better, stopped shorter, and cost less to run. What had started as a necessity during an energy crisis was quickly becoming a cultural shift. The 1975 import scene wasn't just about numbers or trade reports. It was about a transition, one that would permanently alter the DNA of American motoring. Every imported car sold that year played a small part in teaching American drivers a new vocabulary: efficiency, precision, simplicity. They were lessons that would resonate far into the decades that followed. Today, when nearly every car on the road is the product of global collaboration, it's hard to imagine a time when import was still a novelty. But in 1975, those 2 million foreign-built cars were revolutionaries in disguise, quietly shaping tastes, setting standards, and preparing the stage for the modern automotive world we take for granted now. In hindsight, the imports of 1975 didn't just fill a market gap. They filled a cultural one. They reminded Americans that great cars could come from anywhere, that innovation often thrives in times of difficulty, and that the road forward, like the open highways of that era, was meant to be shared. Looking back now, it's remarkable how much those humble little imports changed not only what Americans drove, but how they thought about driving itself. The shift that began in 1975 laid the groundwork for a future that would eventually see Toyota and Honda become two of the most dominant automakers in the country. The seeds planted in that era sprouted into an entirely new automotive culture, one that valued longevity over flash, craftsmanship over sheer size, and smart engineering over brute force. As the years went on, the lessons of 1975 continued to ripple through the industry. American manufacturers took note, slowly adjusting their strategies to meet the rising expectations that imports had set. Compact cars like the Ford Pinto and Chevrolet Vega had tried to compete, but the Japanese and European rivals had already rewritten the rulebook. Consumers began demanding better build quality, improved efficiency, and fewer compromises, demands that would ultimately lead to some of the most innovative decades in car design. But there was also something emotional about that period. For many buyers, their first imported car wasn't just a purchase. It was a statement. It represented independence from the gas-guzzling mainstream, a personal choice to embrace practicality and global perspective. The driver of a 1975 Honda Civic or Volkswagen Rabbit might not have realized it then, but they were participating in a quiet revolution, one that would forever redefine the American relationship with cars. Decades later, enthusiasts still look back on those imports with admiration. They were honest machines, built with integrity and purpose. In a decade often remembered for economic uncertainty and environmental awakening, these cars stood as beacons of progress. They symbolized resilience, adaptation, and a willingness to evolve, traits that would become essential to the automotive industry's survival. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy of 1975's import surge. It proved that innovation knows no borders. Whether born in Tokyo, Stuttgart, or Gothenburg, great ideas could travel thousands of miles and still find a home in American hearts and garages. Those 2 million imported cars weren't just vehicles. They were ambassadors of a global future, paving the way for a world where performance, reliability, and efficiency would speak a universal language.